Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here for our press conference of the Delta Stewardship Council with the unveiling of the Delta Science Plan's Data Summit white paper. One piece of housekeeping before we get started is that this is an open teleconference line, so we ask for your patience and indulgence that we don't have a mute system. If you would be so kind as to mute your phone if you do have any background noise going on, and when we do open it up for questions, that we'll try to take them as quickly as we can, one at a time. First, going to start here with our program host, Dr. Cliff Dahm.
Good afternoon. I'm Cliff Dahm. I'm the lead scientist of the Delta Stewardship Council's Delta Science program. We're based in Sacramento, California. Back in 2012, the National Research Council concluded that a more collaborative approach integrating data from multiple sources was really necessary if we were going to better understand the many environmental challenges that face the California's Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. So other mandates ranging from the California Water Action Plan to presidential executive order that demands more access to data has made it very clear that a new comprehensive data sharing system is needed and necessary. And to study and address this issue, the Delta Science program took the initiative and, along with 7 partners, organized and convened an environmental data summit in June of 2014. Joining me on the line are 3 subject matter experts who will explain what we learned from the summit, elaborate some on the white paper we're releasing today, and tell us where we go from here. To begin, allow me to introduce my colleague, Dr. Peter Goodwin, the previous Delta Science Program lead scientist. I've been in place for about a month now. This entire endeavor was piloted with his guidance, and he has some words for you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dahm, and good afternoon, everyone. Despite Dr. Dahm's kind words there, this was a very extensive team effort. More than 300 scientists, IT experts, resource managers, decision makers, and stakeholders attended the Data Summit in person, and hundreds more followed the 2-day event online, as well as contributing to the development of the white paper. The 2-day event included discussions and presentations on how to expand and refine the management and sharing of environmental data that's currently housed in different public agencies, universities, NGOs, private industry, and other entities. And it also builds on some very innovative initiatives going on in the Bay Area, such as Bay Delta Live. Following the summit, we began the development of the white paper that we're releasing today, that is really a synopsis of the lessons learned and includes a series of recommendations towards implementing better sharing of data, taking advantage of the most up-to-date technology, including business practices, to bring together data from many sources, and then being able to transform this data into usable information to meeting today's environmental management and decision-making challenges. And the paper captures that in its title, Enhancing the Vision for Managing California's Environmental Information. The 50-page document was a team effort with 10 primary authors and many participants contributing who also attended the summit. The document was subsequently peer-reviewed by another 25 environmental and data management experts from across the U.S. and around the world. The white paper outlines how the monumental amounts of data collected each day by state and federal agencies is often inaccessible to others. This inability to retrieve data from normally collaborative sister agencies makes it difficult for scientists and managers to do their jobs, and also to translate this data in a form that policymakers who require readily available facts and figures to make their timely decisions. And we point out with great pride that this white paper has been endorsed by scientists across the U.S. and it's being supported and championed by a number of other California state agencies that have been thinking about these issues. This includes the Strategic Growth Council, the Energy Commission, the Office of Technological Services, the State Water Resources Control Board, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and of course the Department of Water Resources. Joining us now to explain the findings during the collaborative development of the white paper is Dr. Michael Norman, who's the director of the San Diego Supercomputer Center and is a national and international leader in the area of big data.
Thank you, Dr. Goodwin. You might ask why our scientists spent so much time and effort studying the topic of data management. And the answer is really that there are mountains of detailed research data and findings that are basically inaccessible to other researchers. We call this the islands of data phenomenon. And if that data is not available, that forces new researchers to essentially reinvent the wheel, to start from scratch, not knowing about the previous findings. And that, of course, is very inefficient. This slows down scientific discovery, it wastes time and money, and it prevents policymakers from reaching decisions in a timely manner. Now, the summit found that there are 4 distinct issues currently challenging the proper collection and dissemination of environmental data among the California public agencies. And those 4 issues are the following. First, that the state policies are outdated. They were not formulated in a time of rapid internet dissemination. And moreover, the demands on the agencies that own the data has changed dramatically. People are now accustomed to getting data on demand. So there is a mismatch between policy and ability to operate with the data that is out of step with both the policymakers and the public. Second, that there is the fact that the data that does exist is not adequately described so that it can be put into context. If there is a new issue coming to the fore, even if one knew what the data was that was out there, one doesn't know enough about it to know whether that data is relevant for the new policy issue. And that kind of contextual data is called metadata. So briefly, there's not enough metadata to describe the data that we have. The next issue is that the various agencies and researchers collect and manage their data using different methods, making it difficult to collaborate when trying to synthesize the information into a collective whole. So now I'm going to turn the discussion over to Scott Gregory, the Deputy Director for Geospatial Information Systems with the California Department of Technology. He will discuss what we feel are the next steps to bring the vision of the white paper to fruition.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Norman. As with the findings from our investigations in studying and looking at some of the aspects of data management with various experts, there are really 4 distinct next steps that we collectively believe are necessary actions to achieving the goal of streamlining the collaboration of huge amounts of environmental data between various state and federal agencies. Now, this is no small task, but we feel that there's 4 distinct areas, and I want to outline some of those here for you. The first would be that the state should really seek to establish new policies for managing large amounts of data. We all know that the data landscape has changed somewhat. There was discussion previously about the internet being revolutionary. That's commonplace now, but we need to have policies that can speak to new technologies and how to manage information and the data that helps inform information products that are developed. And that will simplify and expedite public decisions. These new policies should also align with other national and global movements towards streamlining data. That way, interoperability and sharing of information is easier for us, and collaboration and innovation can occur more rapidly. Developing a system where environmental data can be accessed from a centralized source was the second point that we identified, and truly an important one. Third is to implement new methods for the clear documentation of existing collected data. There was discussions earlier around metadata, and that really strengthens that point. The fourth would be to develop business models that will better facilitate the management of data and adopt funding strategies to sustain these models. To implement these findings, we recommend an approach based on a partnership of experts and decision makers, which ensures maximum participation and willing cooperation from a future task force. The members of this task force, collectively knowledgeable and the data management challenges we face will allow them to create more robust data sharing venues, resulting in the accelerated discovery of knowledge.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory and Dr. Norman and Dr. Goodwin. We now want to open the discussion to questions from the media. Here to assist is our Public Information Officer, Eric Alvarez.
Thank you, Dr. Dahm. Today's method of asking questions is going to require a bit of patience, like I mentioned early on, since the phone line is open to all the callers at once. So we'll try to filter out your questions. So we've got the four gentlemen on the phone line, and I invite any members of the media to offer a question at this time. Well, I'll ask one question of Mr. Gregory right off the bat. Mr. Gregory, I know that your office has been working with Governor Brown on trying to advance data collection within the state of California. Can you maybe offer us some insight onto where that may be heading?
Certainly, but a little more clarification related to drought crisis or just data in general?
Why don't we start with data in general and then certainly move into drought?
Absolutely. Be happy to answer that. Thank you. So many of you may be aware of this kind of oncoming movement of open data and data transparency and sharing of government information for innovation and development and collaboration. One of the areas in which specifically our government operations agency and governor's office and Department of Technology has been working together on developing an open data platform for the state of California to share and disseminate developed government data. And it's really an interesting step for the state. It's one in which we've had some efforts in the past towards this movement, but really taking a cohesive statewide approach to where environmental data that we're talking about here, water-based information, taxation data, public safety, education, all this myriad of data, pulling it together in a one-stop shop for folks to search, discover, and use, I think can really be revolutionary for how government interacts with citizenry and business, and really extends that conversation that I think personally is a great one to have in moving, especially forward, leveraging technology platforms like mobile computing, open data platforms, and information sharing. Now, back around that needs to be policy, and that's something that we talked about earlier today, having policy around data management. How do we document that information? What's the currency of it? Who can I contact? Who can I ask about the creation of the data? That's all part of this open data platform. We're very excited about it. We're going to be having a open data code-a-thon contest October 24th and 25th, and that's going to be geared around sustainability, greenhouse gas emissions, energy usage in buildings, all around open data, all towards developing a collaborative exercise between citizen coders and government data. So that's one thing, broadly speaking, for the state. Now, secondarily, part of my clarification question was around drought. One thing that we've developed within my office is a way to work with the citizens of the state to help us understand instances of water waste across the state, and then collect that kind of data and share that with our partner agencies for enforcement. So we developed an application called savewater.ca.gov, and that allows users to report water waste in their area and really start to communicate back and share with enforcement entities things that they're seeing on the ground. It's part of this concept that we're beginning to mature within my office around citizens as sensors. How do we have a conversation with our citizenry around data to not only help serve better, but also to help inform better policy making? We're not on the ground every day. We're not out seeing what's happening in communities. If we can develop a protocol or a methodology to have a partnership with our citizenry to help us make the communities better, make our state better, I think it's a great story. That's something that's been working quite well. We work with just about every state water agency in the state currently. We launched this late July and have received approximately 6,000 unique reports with images and time, date, stamp, and locations of where some of this waste is occurring. So we're really proud of that. And to be clear, the state is not performing an enforcement activity. It's more of a collection point. The enforcement activity is down at the water agency, who has purview over those waste complaints.
Mr. Gregory, thank you very much. Let's open it back up. Is there any members of the media that would like to ask a question of the four gentlemen online, please feel free to do so.
I have a question. I was wondering about whether there are models at use in other state agencies or perhaps even at the federal level that could be ported here for the management of data and the data management strategies you alluded to.
Yeah, this is Scott Gregory. I'd be happy to address that. There's several models, actually. I can speak to geospatial data. For one, the state of California strives to follow the Federal Geographic Data Consortium or Committee standard, FGDC standard for metadata for documenting our data sets. We also look to an international standard, an ISO standard that folks outside of the U.S. Adhere to around geospatial data. That's certainly one way that we address that. But we're also looking very closely at what the federal government has done with data.gov and some of the methodologies that they've leveraged for documentation of information and categorization. I think there's some novel ways in which they've approached that. But as I mentioned before, we're really in a pilot stage, and we're ironing out what the best-of-breed practices are for the state. For sure, we are looking at other successes across the U.S. and internationally on how to approach that.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question of our panel at this time?
Actually, could I just build on what Scott said?
Please.
I think that the primary authors, we were very aware of these big changes which are coming down the road right now, both at the federal level, for example, the Open Water Data Initiative, as well as Scott mentioned, there's a range in environmental data of international standards. So we were very cognizant that these are coming. Many of them, as Mr. Gregory said, are not on the ground yet. But the fundamental principles behind the white paper would allow the inclusion of not just those standards, but if people are developing the sort of web services and tools in an open source manner that could then be picked up and we don't need to reinvent the wheel, the framework would allow selective use of some of these federal tools which are being developed. And Dr. Norman may want to add that, as he's very involved in some of the big research data initiatives in the U.S.
Sure. Thanks, Peter. Well, I would just start by pointing out that data federation is not a new thing. It's been done successfully in other fields of study. For example, neuroscience research data has been federated across the whole nation through an initiative led by the National Institutes of Health. So there are lots of worked examples of federated data resources of various kinds that we could look at. Specifically about water, there is a regional data water management plan for San Diego County that one of my researchers is leading, and that's pretty far along in terms of going to the technical level of this question, both in terms of policy and integration technology. So we don't have to look out of state necessarily. We can just look within the state in certain regions that are moving this forward.
Well, thank you, Dr. Norman. Again, are there any other questions out there from anyone who might be calling in? Dr. Norman, if I may ask a question, I'm curious about the reality of this happening in a time frame. Creating these systems, is this something that will be commonplace? Maybe they are commonplace now, but when we're talking about a vision document like this, a white paper, alluding to something that might be a futuristic ideal, are there microcosms of this type of development already in place?
Absolutely. I'm looking at the design document for the Integrated Regional Water Management Plan for the San Diego region. This is an 80-page document, and it gets the details. This is the outgrowth of a process, a committee of experts, as was said, that started probably 2 years ago. And so the planning takes quite a while to get right, but the implementation does not take that long once you know what it is you're trying to do. I think this is all very doable within a 5-year time frame, including planning, definition, and implementation.
Do you foresee, sir, any impediments in the way of political will or financing? Is this something that will find itself to be the norm within government, or are there some ideals that must be overcome first?
Absolutely. Those are the dominant issues. It's really not the technical issues. those have been developed in other projects at other places and times. And the technology just keeps on getting better. The hard part is the funding and the political will to make this happen. And with regard to will, there's kind of two approaches. One is the coalition of the willing approach, and the other is the policy directive approach. And I think both may be required in this case, but one can certainly start showing the value of the idea through a coalition of the willing project.
Again, I invite, if there are anyone else on the line that would like to ask a question, please feel free to do so at this point. Dr. Goodwin, I have one quick question for you. The idea for this concept to have the data summit, is this something that you see happening again? Do you foresee redoing this project to bring in new information, new ideas?
Actually, Eric, that's a very good question. Just to give the history behind that, if you recall, this is something that came out of the development of the Delta Science Plan, which was requested by the Delta Stewardship Council to make data more available. I think what would be very useful now, as people like Mr. Gregory is moving ahead in many of these principles, will be very interesting to see where his office decides to take this. I think for sure it would be worthwhile in the coming months to take a look and see with these recommendations how many things have started at grassroots level. Certainly the governor has demonstrated on several occasions a real commitment to making data available to folks. So I suspect that in the coming months, from the science program's perspective, that we will do some kind of follow-up to see the progress that's being made. That's also highly likely to be driven by the great steering committee that we had representing many of the agencies which we mentioned earlier.
Again, I invite anyone that might be on the line at this time, they're welcome to ask a question. I ask any of the gentlemen that have participated in this conference today, what, if anything, do you foresee as being a practical application to John Q. Public? Obviously, this is something that we're inviting government to get involved with to streamline the access to data. And we know from just reading in the newspaper the large amounts of data that are being utilized these days. In the case of drought, NASA is providing vast amounts of information via satellites. What, if anything, do you foresee that maybe the average consumer might find this to be an applicable and usable form of collection? Is there anything out there in the future?
Yeah, this is Scott Gregory. I think that there's a number of use cases where John Q. or Jane Q. Public would find benefit. You know, information becomes very relevant when it begins to touch the lives of individuals, and who knows how that's going to be. But as we put out information, data that can then be interpreted as information, it becomes very powerful, and informed citizenry is quite a powerful entity. Give you an example. Being able to publish out information related to the drought, water conservation efforts geographically. Take it even back further to something that maybe some of us deal with every day. If we have children, the test scores of certain school districts or the API scores of a school district or area that I'm looking to move to. What's the crime rate there? How else would they know that unless we're able to provide that kind of information? But not only provide that information, but put it in a context that's understandable. We have a very knowledgeable panel here and of course on the phone, but you know, not everyone is a data scientist. Not everyone is somebody that lives in this world every day. Providing it in ways for folks to understand a visual context, perhaps a map or a product of mashing together multiple data sets to paint a certain picture. That's where the real power comes together, and that's where it starts to inform everyone from the 6th grade student that's going to write a report on water conservation efforts in his town, all the way up to the PhD candidate researcher that needs to dig into really in-depth metrics about certain type of information they're trying to investigate. I think the range is so wide and the potential is so great. We don't know yet exactly what's going to come out, but in the simplest form, I think an informed citizenry will be the byproduct of this endeavor, and I think it's a worthy cause.
I want to take that in a slightly different direction. This is Mike Norman. I just learned last week that NOAA, National Organization, what does NOAA?
National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration.
Thank you, NOAA. NOAA, which is under the OMB directive to share its data with the public, has just cut contracts with a half a dozen cloud providers who will make available data from NOAA, raw data, image data, sensor data. These cloud providers are just going to make that data available, basically like setting up a buffet. And the hope is that there will be entrepreneurs who figure out how to turn that raw data into something valuable to somebody. And so if you think about Google Maps, which now has road congestion, traffic congestion, that was done by a little company that realized that people driving in their cars with their cell phones, their GPS locations could be measured, and those people in cars would actually be providing the information that would allow Google Maps to color the roads green, orange, or red. So this was a startup that did this and probably sold that company for billions to Google. So NOAA hopes a similar thing will happen. And this has already happened with the Weather Channel. The Weather Channel was a startup that became a company based on access to government data. So I think one hope would be, and this gets back to something that Dr. Gregory talked about, is citizen censor, but also citizen entrepreneur could do something unimaginable with this kind of data.
This is Scott Gregory. I think to piggyback on that, a huge economic development potential and opportunity here. Google's an excellent example of what can be achieved. To me, I don't know if you can hear the excitement in my voice. I'm very excited about this concept because who knows what can come out of this. You could have a citizen coder, that a middle school kid that takes this data and does something amazing with it. I mean, we've seen it on the news. There was a kid who built his own clock and took it to school, and it caused an uproar. But kids aren't playing with Tinker Toys anymore. They're playing with computers. They're playing with data. They're building apps. It's really exciting.
Perhaps if I could build on that just a little bit, I think it's a great question. And there's also the famous example about the high school kid in upstate New York who discovered a new star because the astronomic data is just out there and publicly available. But I think in California, bringing it back to the environmental data, the people of California really care about the air they breathe, the water that they drink, where they go swimming, where they go fishing. So they have a real interest in this type of knowledge. And if you're being asked to cut back on sprinkling your lawns and things like that, if you do that, you want to be sure that it's benefiting something. So what does this mean to the ecology? Did it help prevent catastrophic collapse? What are we doing as a state? And my personal contribution of cutting back on water use, how does that scale up in my community, and what does it mean to my streams and rivers and other water bodies? And this is the type of thing that in really a very few years, people will just be able to go online and ask these types of questions and get that information back.
This is Cliff Dahm. I'll add one more to the list of ideas here. I was in Germany last summer, and Germany has suffered through some massive floods in the last few years. And the German people, like the people in the United States, are very commonly using internet data to look at the location of storms and cells and things like that. But what they haven't yet done is translate that into stage and flooding and river discharge. They're wanting to develop that kind of capacity so you can also watch what's happening in your local river. And this kind of data would make this possible.
This is Tina Cannon-Leahy. I came on late and I was afraid to ask a question that might have been redundant, but just listening to the conversation, this is incredibly exciting. So this is a wonderful start, I hope, to a bigger conversation. I'm sure you've talked about that, about where we go next with it.
Well, thank you for your participation. Once again, as we wrap up our discussion today, are there any other folks out there that would like to ask a quick question? Well, then we want to thank you very much for allowing us to take part of your day and to enlighten you somewhat on our challenge here, this vision document. You are welcome to obtain a copy by going online to the Delta Stewardship Council. We have copies available for download, and if you have any additional questions, feel free to give us a call here at the Council. Our phone numbers and our email addresses are online at deltacouncil.ca.gov. Do you gentlemen have any final comments you'd like to make? Then with that, I thank you very much for your time and wish everyone a pleasant afternoon.